I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee when the phone rang. The kitchen was quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the old wood floor beneath my slippers. Outside, the early morning fog still clung to the trees, casting long, ghostly shadows across the backyard. It was a Saturday, the kind that used to be filled with noise and movement when Nathan was younger. Back then, Saturdays meant pancakes, cartoons, and dog walks. Now, they just meant silence. I reached for the phone without thinking, my thumb instinctively swiping to answer. I didn't even check the caller ID. Maybe I should have. "Hi, Elaine." Lily's voice chirped through the line, chipper and bright, the kind of forced cheerfulness that immediately made my stomach tighten. "Just wanted to let you know we're heading up to the mountains for the weekend. Family trip. We've got everything sorted." Her words rushed out like a train on tracks, fast, mechanical, and impossible to stop. I blinked, gripping the edge of the counter. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "That sounds nice. I hope you all enjoy yourselves." She didn't pause, didn't explain, didn't even hint that maybe I'd been forgotten or that my absence might have been an oversight. She just went on, telling me how she had packed the car the night before, how Nathan had finally remembered the marshmallows for the bonfire, how their dog Milo had practically leapt into the back seat in excitement. Not once did she say my name again. Not once did she ask if I wanted to come. I ended the call quickly, before she could say anything more that might puncture the thin layer of calm I was desperately trying to maintain. As soon as the line went dead, I set the phone down on the counter like it had burned me. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out of something, but this felt different. I stood in the kitchen, for a long moment, staring at the ceramic mug in my hands. The warmth of the coffee had faded, just like everything else that used to bring comfort. I carried the mug to the table and sat down, folding my hands in front of me. For a few minutes, I just sat in silence, the same way I had learned to sit through holidays alone, birthdays missed, Sunday dinners that never got scheduled. But this stung in a different way. I thought about how many weekends I had helped them, how many times I'd walked Milo while Lily worked late, or Nathan was stuck in traffic, how I had driven across town in the rain once just to bring them the baby blanket they'd forgotten on a trip with their daughter. And now, this trip, this family trip, didn't seem to include me. I looked down at my hands. My nails were neatly trimmed, the polish chipped at the edges. They were hands that had cooked for them, sewn their curtains, fed their dog, and held their daughter when she was teething, but none of that seemed to count anymore. I got up slowly and walked to the guest room, the room they used to stay in when their house was being renovated. The room I had kept tidy and ready for drop-ins, emergencies, or last-minute overnights. It hadn't been used in over a year. A fine layer of dust coated the nightstand, and the linens were still tucked neatly beneath the comforter untouched. The ache in my chest bloomed a little wider. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was harder to name. It was something quieter, more insidious. It was the feeling of becoming small in someone else's story, of being written out without notice, like a background character, fading from relevance. I wandered back to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich I didn't want. I put the kettle on, then turned it off before it could whistle. I stood in the hallway for too long, unsure whether I should mop the floor or just lie down and cry. I chose neither. I just stood there, blinking at the wall, letting the emptiness settle. I told myself I shouldn't take it personally, that they probably didn't mean anything by it. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe they assumed I'd be busy. But I knew better. This wasn't about the trip. Not really. It was about something bigger, something I had been refusing to admit to myself for years. My place in their lives had shifted, quietly, without a single conversation. Where once I had been a helper, a support, a partner in their parenting journey, I was now just a name in their phone when they needed something. Nothing more. That realization didn't come like a slap. It came like a slow leak, a quiet unraveling of something I had worked so hard to keep tightly wound. I sat down at the kitchen table again and rested my head in my hands. I used to think love was loud, boisterous dinners, laughter in the backyard, handmade cards, but I had come to understand that the absence of love had a sound too. It sounded like a one-sided phone call, like a trip no one invited you on, like a cheerful voice informing you that everything was sorted. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful, it was punishing. And in that silence, I heard something else. I heard the sound of my own heart, not breaking, but waking up. This wasn't the first time I had been left behind. But it would be the last time I let it happen without asking why. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching faint headlights brush across the room every now and then from cars passing down the street. The light came and went, and with it, my thoughts, restless and loud in the silence of my home. I kept thinking about Lily's voice on the phone. So cheerful, so rehearsed. It wasn't just the words she said that bothered me, it was the way she said them. As if I was a stranger being updated, not a family member being included. At some point past midnight, I got up and padded barefoot down the hallway. The house was cool, the kind of quiet that pressed in on your skin. My fingers grazed the wall as I moved, familiar with every step, every creak. This was the house where Nathan had taken his first steps, where we had baked cookies on rainy afternoons, where every wall held stories. I stopped at the guest room again. The door was slightly ajar, just the way I always left it, welcoming, just in case they ever decided to stay. I pushed it open fully and stood in the doorway, arms folded across my chest. The moonlight spilled across the bed, illuminating the soft floral quilt I had sewn years ago. A forgotten birthday card still sat on the nightstand from one of Nathan's early visits with Lily. The handwriting inside now faded. I stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave under my weight with a sigh, as if remembering bodies that used to rest here. My eyes roamed the room, over the framed picture of Nathan and Lily at their wedding, the little basket of travel-sized toiletries I kept stocked, the lamp with the crack Lily once apologized for. It was a room built for presence, but now it only held absence. There was dust on the windowsill, a spider web near the ceiling I hadn't cleaned in weeks. Why would I? No one had come. No one was coming. My throat tightened. This wasn't about a mountain trip. It wasn't even about being forgotten. It was the realization that I had become a convenience, a background figure, someone who was always there, until suddenly, I wasn't needed anymore. And I had let that happen. I'd filled in every gap, without asking for anything, picked up their slack, smiled when I was tired, bit my tongue when I felt hurt, watched Milo when they had dinner reservations, babysat their daughter when they had plans, drove across town to drop off forgotten lunchboxes and dry cleaning and birthday cakes. All of it, without question. Because that's what you do when you love someone. Right? But now, sitting in this unused guest room, the love didn't feel warm anymore. It felt heavy. It felt like a weight I had been carrying alone. I stood up and crossed to the small closet. Inside, a couple of old jackets still hung. Nathan's, mostly. One of Lily's scarves was still there too, soft and lavender-scented, untouched since last fall. I reached out and touched it, holding it between my fingers. Had she even noticed it was missing? Probably not. I thought about my own mother then, how she had warned me, once, in passing, about the dangers of giving too much without setting boundaries. I had laughed at the time, dismissing it as an old woman's bitterness. But now I saw the wisdom in her words. She hadn't been bitter, she had been tired of being erased slowly, piece by piece, by the very people she had raised. I closed the closet and walked back into the hallway. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me. I didn't go back to bed. I couldn't. I made my way to the kitchen, flipped on the light, and stared at the empty table. It was a beautiful table, solid oak. We'd picked it out when Nathan was 10, after the old one finally collapsed under the weight of too many science fair projects. I'd sanded and stained it myself. Every scratch told a story. I placed both hands on the surface and closed my eyes. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies or dramatic scenes. I just wanted to be seen, to be valued. Not for what I could do, but for who I was. Elaine, mother, woman, not maid, not sitter, not mom, can you? But something had changed, and I could feel it like a low vibration beneath my skin. That's when I heard the soft padding of paws and the gentle whine. Milo. He looked up at me, tail thumping on the floor. His eyes were round and warm, so full of blind, innocent trust. I crouched down and ran my hands through his thick, golden fur. You still see me, huh? I whispered, My voice cracking, he pressed his head into my palm. The tears came quietly, leaking down my cheeks in silence. Not sobs, just a release. Years of being the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible support system, pouring out in slow, silent weeping in the company of a dog who never forgot me. After a few minutes, I wiped my face and stood up. There, in the early hours of the morning, something inside me settled. Not into grief, but into resolve. I wouldn't beg to be included. I wouldn't try to make them feel guilty. But I would no longer allow myself to be used, like a tool they pulled out only when it suited them. I would no longer be the afterthought. They had their weekend. They had each other. They had everything sorted. Well then, so would I. By morning I'd convinced myself that perhaps I was overreacting. It was easier that way. Easier to believe that I was just reading into things too much. That Lily and Nathan had simply wanted a quiet weekend to themselves. That maybe, just maybe, they had been trying to spare me the trouble of a trip. After all, the mountains were cold this time of year. My knees didn't like the cold. I moved through my routine, like I always did, brushing my teeth, feeding Milo, making toast. I didn't finish, but even with the curtains drawn and the kettle warming on the stove, I couldn't shake the hollow ache, lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat. I was sitting in the sunroom, if you could call it that, considering it hadn't seen a good sunbeam in days. When my phone buzzed, I didn't rush to check it, but something told me it wasn't going to be a check-in or a sweet photo from their trip. I picked it up and stared at the screen. Lily, can you keep an eye on Milo while we're away? He'll need food around 3, and he prefers to sleep near the fireplace. Thanks. Just that. No? How are you? No. Sorry we didn't invite you. No, hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Sure, no problem. I hit send before I could think about it too hard. Before the little voice inside me could remind me that this wasn't kindness. It was convenience. That in their minds, I wasn't someone who might be lonely, or disappointed, or even hurt. I was just the person who was always there when they needed something. Milo came trotting into the room a moment later, sensing that I had received some kind of command from his rightful owners. He sat next to me, with a gentle huff, resting his head on my knee, like he always did. His fur was warm and soft, and his tail thumped once as I scratched behind his ear. Guess it's just you and me again, I murmured. He looked up at me with those endlessly trusting eyes, and for a second, I felt a lump in my throat that I wasn't ready to face. I loved Milo. I truly did. He wasn't just a pet. They'd raised him in my home as much as in theirs. I'd watched him grow from a clumsy puppy that chased his own tail into a calm, loyal companion who followed me around like a second shadow. But now, as I sat stroking his fur, something sour crept in. This was all I was to them now, the dog sitter, the default caretaker, the one who stepped in when things were too busy, too chaotic, too inconvenient for them to handle on their own. And they didn't even think to ask if I might want to come along, or if I might be hurting. Just a quick message about food and sleeping preferences. Like I was the hired help. I swallowed the thought, ashamed of how bitter it sounded even in my own mind. But the more I tried to push it away, the heavier it got. I stood up, Milo following dutifully, and walked into the kitchen. His food container sat near the back door. I scooped out the kibble, poured it into his bowl, and watched him eat with a quiet, rhythmic crunch. You don't know how good you have it, I muttered, smiling, despite myself. The house was silent, except for the soft click of his teeth on the ceramic dish. After he finished, he trotted to the rug near the fireplace and curled into a tight golden ball. He always did that when they were gone, like he was waiting for them to walk through the door again. I knelt beside him, running my fingers along the curve of his back. Do you think they even notice how often I'm the one here? I whispered. He didn't respond, of course, but his eyes met mine with a softness that made my chest ache. It wasn't just about being asked to feed the dog, it was the reduction, the quiet demotion from mother and friend to background support, to task doer, to she'll take care of it. I had started to notice it in small ways years ago, how Lily would always default to me when she needed help, but rarely included me in her joys. How Nathan would lean on me when the baby was teething, but somehow forget to invite me to her birthday party. How I was always on the periphery, close enough to fix things, but never close enough to be celebrated. I looked at Milo. I'm more than this, I said. Not for the first time. And yet, I didn't move. I sat there, brushing dog hair from my pants, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Present, but unseen. Helpful, yes, but only when it suited them. I stayed on the rug with Milo until my legs began to ache from the floor. I stood slowly, stretching with a quiet groan. The sun had crept halfway across the floor, casting a golden line that stopped just short of where Milo lay. I looked around the living room, the family photos on the mantel, the hand-knitted blanket draped over the couch, the small pink shoe still sitting in the corner from the last time my granddaughter was over. All these pieces of our life together, all the little proofs that I'd been a part of it once. But now? Now it felt like they were just artifacts of a time that had passed. A time when I was still central to the orbit of their lives. Now I was a planet pushed farther and farther out into the cold, watching from a distance. I stepped back into the kitchen, made myself a fresh cup of coffee, and stared out the window. If I was just the dog sitter, then maybe it was time I stopped acting like I was more. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep doing this much longer, not without breaking. The morning passed in a blur. I cleaned the counters twice, rearranged the spice rack, for no reason, and even dusted the baseboards behind the sofa, something I hadn't done in months. I wasn't cleaning because it needed to be done. I was cleaning because I needed something to do with my hands, something that would keep my mind from circling the same painful thought like a hawk over open ground. They had gone on a trip without me. Not a spontaneous dinner or a last-minute show, an entire weekend getaway, a family getaway, one that included marshmallows, blankets, scenic photos, and laughter I would never hear, all without me. And yet, somehow, they had remembered to ask me to feed the dog. It kept hitting me in strange waves, sometimes with anger, sometimes with sadness, but most often with this quiet, almost clinical clarity, a dawning realization. I wasn't part of the family dynamic anymore. I was a useful extension, reliable, predictable, but not central. Around noon, I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the folded laundry I hadn't put away. It sat there like a metaphor, soft and stagnant. I reached over to the nightstand and picked up my phone. I hadn't looked at my banking app in over a week, not since paying the gas bill and transferring money to cover Nathan's insurance premium. He had forgotten about it again, and I'd handled it like I always did, because that's what I was good for, quietly fixing the things no one else bothered to look at. I opened the app, tapping through the screens with muscle memory. There it was, 3 active cards linked to my account. All 3 were in use: Nathan's, Lily's, and the joint card they used for groceries, gas, and travel. I stared at the screen. They were using my money to fund a trip I hadn't been invited to, a trip they hadn't even tried to disguise as something else. They'd called it what it was: family. My chest tightened, not with rage, but with resolve. I hovered my thumb over the freeze button. Just one tap, one tiny action, invisible to anyone but me and them. Once they tried to check out at the grocery store or buy gas on the way home. They wouldn't starve, they wouldn't be stranded, but they'd feel it. A tremor, a shiver. They'd feel me. I sat there for a long time, debating it, not because I didn't think they deserved it, but because for so many years I had operated from a place of guilt. I had convinced myself that my worth was in how much I could do for others, how much I could absorb without complaint, how easily I could be forgotten. But this wasn't about money. It was about power. Not the kind you use to control people. The kind you use to protect yourself when nobody else will. My thumb pressed down. Card 1, frozen. Card 2, frozen. Card 3, frozen. Done. I exhaled slowly and set the phone down, my hands trembling, not from fear but from the sheer weight of what I'd just done. A warm surge bloomed in my chest. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't vindication. It was something quieter, deeper, a reclamation. This wasn't revenge. This was a declaration. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, like it always was in the early afternoon. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, oblivious to the small revolution happening inside my home. I didn't expect Nathan or Lily to notice right away. It might take a purchase or two for the reality to land. But when it did, they would finally see what happened when someone like me, the forgotten fixture, stepped out of place. Milo stirred from the fireplace and patted over to me, his nails clicking gently against the floor. He leaned into my leg, seeking my hand like he always did. I reached down, stroked the spot between his ears. "I'm not angry," I whispered. "I'm just done. Done being predictable. Done being the person who was always available, but never included." I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my thoughts strangely steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel petty. I felt awake. I sipped slowly, letting the cold bite the back of my throat, the same way the realization had bitten me last night when I sat on the edge of that guest bed and saw dust where memories should have been. I looked around at my kitchen, at the shelves I'd stocked for them, the baking tins I used for Lily's favorite lemon cake, the stool where my granddaughter used to sit while I tied her shoes. So many pieces of myself had been carved out to make room for them, and now it was time to reclaim them. Milo followed me back to the living room. He circled twice on the rug before settling down again, yawning widely before resting his chin on his paws. I sat on the couch, phone beside me, and waited. Not with desperation, not even with anticipation. I just sat, content in the knowledge that for once the silence was mine to control. They would call, eventually. And when they did, it wouldn't be the same old conversation. This time, I wouldn't pretend to be okay. I wouldn't fill in the gaps to make it easier for them. I would speak. And they would listen. Or they wouldn't. But either way, I wasn't going back to being who I was before today. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of quiet. Of folding towels I didn't need to fold. Of checking the window every time a car passed. Of sitting in the stillness of my living room, with only the occasional rustle from Milo, to remind me that I wasn't completely alone. Then came the buzz. One short vibration from my phone sitting on the end table. My hand hovered over it for a moment, reluctant, but I already knew who it was. I picked it up. "Lily, why did you freeze the cards? We can't even get groceries for the trip without them. You know this is making things hard on everyone." I read the message twice, slowly. Hard on everyone. I stared at the words, feeling them settle into the center of my chest like a pebble dropped into a deep well. I could have responded immediately. I could have typed out everything I wanted to say, all the moments I'd swallowed, all the times I'd smiled through the sting of being left out. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down and walked outside. The air was brisk, the kind that bit at your skin and flushed your cheeks. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked slowly toward the garden. There wasn't much to see this time of year, just a few stubborn stalks left over from last season and the bare bones of rose bushes waiting for spring. But there was something calming about being among things that were quiet by nature. No phones, no expectations, just stillness. I knelt beside the rose bush closest to the gate, the one I had planted when Nathan moved out for college. It had bloomed beautifully that first spring, bursting with color as if to reassure me that not everything had to feel empty when something changed. My fingers brushed the base of its branches. The leaves were gone now, the stems bare, but the roots were there, still alive, still waiting. I stayed there for a while, crouched among the reminders of what used to grow. The cold settled into my knees, but I didn't move. I needed the silence. I needed the space to think. When I finally walked back inside, the house felt colder somehow, even though the thermostat read the same. I stood at the threshold of the kitchen, staring at the clock. Time was moving, but I felt stuck in place. I poured myself a cup of tea and brought it to the table. Milo followed and curled at my feet, warm and dependable as ever. I reached down to scratch his ears and let out a long, slow breath. Then I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could feel the pressure building behind my ribcage, a need to say something, to explain myself, to justify this little rebellion. But then I thought about all the times I had justified their choices, all the ways I had excused the hurt, minimized my own needs to keep things smooth. I thought about the countless dinners I had prepared and eaten alone, the birthdays skipped, the weekends I was good enough to help, but not good enough to be celebrated. I thought about the last time Nathan hugged me. Not a quick sidearm pat, but a real, present embrace. I couldn't even remember when it was. And with all that swirling in my mind, I typed, "Maybe it's time you all learned how to do things without relying on me." No anger, no explanation, just truth. I hit send. And then I waited. It didn't take long. The phone rang. "Nathan." I stared at the screen, his name glowing bright like a flare in the dark. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something inside me told me not to run. I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp, "why are you doing this?" I stood at the counter, my free hand gripping the edge for balance. "Doing what, Nathan?" "This," he said, frustration threading through every syllable. "Freezing the cards, making a scene. It's just a trip." Those 3 words hit me like ice water. "Do you realize?" I said, my voice trembling, "how many times I've been there for you? How many times I've stepped in without being asked, without making a fuss because I thought I mattered?" There was a pause. "I didn't mean for you to feel this way," he said, his voice softer now. "But I do feel this way," I said. "I've felt it for years, and I've said nothing, done nothing, because I thought that was love, sacrifice. But you know what I've learned? Silence is not the same as peace." Nathan let out a breath. I guess I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. "No," I replied. "You didn't." We sat in that quiet together for a moment. 2 people connected by blood and years of unspoken words. "I don't need anything from you," I said finally. "But I do deserve something. Respect, recognition." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched thin between us. Then came a whisper. "I hear you, Mom." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I hope so." Then I ended the call. No dramatic goodbye, no emotional unraveling, just the sound of a line going quiet, and a mother who had finally said what needed to be said. The next day passed like a quiet storm. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check social media. I didn't even open the curtains in the living room. I just existed, moving from room to room like a ghost occupying the edges of a life I'd spent decades building. Milo stayed close, sensing something in the air. Dogs are intuitive like that. He followed me from the kitchen to the laundry room, from the laundry room to the hallway, never more than a few feet behind me. Sometimes he'd press his head against my leg, as if to say, "I'm here, I see you." I wish that had been enough, but I was bracing myself. I knew the storm hadn't passed. It was only circling. And then, around 3:15 in the afternoon, the knock came. It wasn't timid. It was sharp, fast, deliberate. I froze. Milo barked once, then ran toward the front door, tail wagging like he'd been waiting for this moment. I followed slowly, my pulse beating in my throat. I glanced through the peephole. Lily. She was standing on the porch in a beige wool coat, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her hair pulled back too perfectly, her mouth pressed into a firm, thin line. She didn't look like a woman who had come to apologize. She looked like a woman ready for a confrontation. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "I need to talk to you," she said immediately, brushing past me into the living room without waiting for permission. I turned, closed the door gently, and followed her. She was already standing in the center of the room, arms still crossed, eyes fixed on me. "What the hell is this about freezing the credit cards?" she demanded. I blinked, keeping my voice steady. "I think you know exactly what it's about." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being clear." She shook her head. "This is childish. Elaine, you're making everyone uncomfortable. Nathan's freaking out. We had to put half the groceries back at the register yesterday, and you're here, playing the victim." I felt the sting, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I straightened my back and let the words settle. "You think this is about groceries?" I asked, my tone cool. "This is about respect. Lily, this is about the fact that I've spent years doing everything I could to support you, to support Nathan, and every time I ask for nothing, and still, I get treated like the hell." She flinched, just barely, but she recovered quickly, her voice rising again. "Oh please, you're just upset because you weren't invited. It's not like we planned this trip to hurt you." "Then why didn't you ask me to come?" I countered, stepping closer now. "Why am I good enough to feed the dog, but not good enough to sit around the fire with you? Why am I only remembered when something needs to be done?" Lily's eyes narrowed. "Because you never want to go on trips. You always have some excuse, your knees, your garden, your to-do list. You act like you don't want to be bothered, and then you make us feel guilty when we don't ask." My lips parted in shock. She really believed that. I made excuses. I said softly, because I didn't want to beg for space in my own family. I didn't want to be pitied into invitations. I wanted to be wanted. Lily hesitated, her expression shifting just slightly. Guilt? Recognition? It passed too fast to catch. She turned away from me then, as if the sight of me was too much. I don't have time for this, she muttered. You always say that, I replied. Whenever something requires more than a surface smile or a quick thank you, you disappear. She turned sharply. You need to stop making everything about you. We all have our lives. You can't keep acting like you're the center of everything. And you can't keep pretending like I don't exist, I shot back. Like I'm not the one who's picked up your pieces, who's watched Milo, fed your daughter, picked up your dry cleaning, run your errands, made your birthdays special. She held up a hand. Enough. No, I said. Not this time. The room went silent. We stood there, two women from different generations, staring each other down in the middle of a home that once felt like sanctuary, but now felt like a battlefield. I'm not doing this for drama, I continued, my voice calmer now. I'm doing this because I've had enough. I'm not invisible, and I won't be treated like I am. Lily looked down at her hands. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked uncertain. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad, she said quietly. And that's the problem, I replied. She turned away again, walking toward the door. If you're going to act like this, she said, her voice tight, then I guess you don't need us either. I stared at her back, heart pounding. I don't need you to need me, I said. I need you to respect me. She didn't answer. She just opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind her without looking back. I stood there, in the echo of her departure, the living room suddenly too quiet, too hollow. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. Because for once, I had spoken without flinching. And I had meant every word. The door clicked shut behind Lily, and the silence she left in her wake was deafening. I stood there for a few moments, unmoving, listening to the echo of her departure settle across the walls like dust. The energy in the room still pulsed from the confrontation, my words lingering like smoke, hers like frost. Milo, ever attuned to the tension, had retreated to his spot near the fireplace. He watched me now, with wide, uncertain eyes, as if he was waiting for me to either cry or collapse. I did neither. Instead, I turned and walked toward the kitchen, my steps slow but steady. The tea I'd poured earlier had gone cold. I dumped it out and ran the tap, the rush of water oddly loud in the quiet house. I wasn't proud of everything I had said to Lily, but I wasn't sorry either. I had spent so many years biting my tongue, softening the truth, making excuses for the way she and Nathan treated me, not with cruelty, but with absence, a kind of benign neglect, a polite invisibility, but invisibility had a cost. I carried my fresh cup of tea to the back porch and stepped outside. The wind had picked up since the morning, and it tugged at the hem of my sweater. I wrapped it tighter around myself and descended the steps slowly, the mug warm between my hands. The garden looked even more lifeless today, though I knew that wasn't true. It was the season. Everything slept this time of year, and yet it mirrored so much of what I was feeling, bare, exposed, stripped of color and comfort. I walked to the rosebush by the fence, the one I had visited the day before, the one I had planted the year Nathan left for college. It had bloomed every spring without fail. No matter the frost, no matter how harsh the winter, it always came back, stronger, wilder. I crouched beside it now, setting my tea down in the grass. My fingers brushed the stiff, thorny stem. Still here, I whispered. A sudden gust of wind pushed my hair into my face. I closed my eyes, letting the cold slap my skin. The conversation with Lily replayed in my head, every word, every glance, every moment when her tone sharpened like a blade. But it wasn't her words that hurt the most. It was her certainty, her belief that I had always wanted to be left alone, that I was the one who withdrew. That narrative was easier for her to believe, I suppose. It absolved her of guilt, made my exclusion logical, acceptable. I had given too much, too quietly. That was on me, but I couldn't carry all the blame anymore. I stood slowly, my knees aching with the movement, and brushed the dirt from my pants. The tea had cooled again, but I sipped it anyway. As I turned back toward the house, I saw the little pink rubber ball that my granddaughter had left behind. On her last visit, it had rolled beneath the porch steps, gathering dirt. I reached down to retrieve it, brushing it clean with the sleeve of my sweater. The small imprint of a smiling cartoon animal stared up at me, worn but intact. She hadn't been by in months. Lily always had reasons: school events, sickness, schedule conflicts. And I never pressed. I didn't want to be the overbearing mother-in-law. I wanted to be easy, supportive, convenient. But all it got me was distance. I placed the ball on the porch railing and went back inside. The house felt warmer after the cold air, but it was still too quiet. I missed laughter, movement, the clatter of dishes, the rustle of jackets, the sound of Nathan's voice calling out from the hallway. But more than anything, I missed being wanted. Milo lifted his head as I passed, wagging his tail. I knelt beside him and buried my fingers in his fur. "You're the only one who doesn't make me feel like I'm asking for too much," I murmured. He pressed his head into my chest. I sat there on the floor beside him, the weight of the past few days pressing down on me. I thought about the years I'd given up, my weekends, my holidays, my savings, the ways I'd rearranged my life around their needs. And yet, when I asked for space, not even in words, but in action, I became the villain. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. No new messages, no missed calls. I wasn't sure if that was a relief or another wound. A part of me wanted to reach out to Nathan, to explain, to smooth the edges of the confrontation, but I stopped myself. Let them sit with it. Let them feel the absence of me for once. I needed to be more than the one who cleaned up messes, literal and emotional. I needed to be Elaine again. Not mom, not dog sitter, not stand-in grandmother, just me. I stood and went to the hallway closet. Inside was a box I hadn't opened in years, labeled for later. It held old journals, half-finished letters, travel brochures I'd once dreamed of using. I pulled it out and set it on the dining table. I peeled back the tape. Inside, a brochure for a coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. A list of books I'd planned to read, a folded piece of paper in my own handwriting. Things I still want. I ran my fingers across it, heart aching. It was time to become someone else in my own life. Not the background. Not the afterthought. But the main character. 2 days passed without another word from Nathan or Lily. I didn't reach out either. It wasn't out of spite. I just needed the silence. I needed to let the space breathe without rushing to fill it. For so long, I had been the first one to apologize, to compromise, to smooth things over before the dust even settled. But this time, I let it settle. I let it thicken in the corners, like a quiet fog. And the world didn't end. I started waking up earlier again, not because I had things to do for someone else, but because I wanted time with myself. The quiet mornings were mine. Coffee at the kitchen table, my notebook open, writing thoughts that had no audience, no purpose other than to exist. I was beginning to recognize the sound of my own voice again, even if it was just a whisper on the page. It was around 10 in the morning on the third day when I heard a knock at the front door, not sharp and demanding like Lily's, but soft, almost hesitant. Milo didn't bark this time. He just wagged his tail and wandered over. Curious. I peeked through the window. Joanne, Nathan's aunt, my late husband's sister, one of the few people in the family who had always seen me not as a tool or a fallback, but as a person. We weren't close, not in the way some sisters-in-law are, but she had a kind of quiet wisdom I had always admired. She never gossiped, never stirred things up. She just noticed. I opened the door. Her face was pinched against the cold, her cheeks rosy, hair tucked into a knitted gray beanie. She held a small paper bag in one hand. "Elaine," she said gently, "do you mind if I come in?" I stepped aside and nodded. "Of course. Come in." She slipped off her boots in the entryway and followed me into the kitchen, setting the bag on the counter. "I brought scones," she said, "from that little bakery you used to like. I wasn't sure if you were still eating sweets, but I figured it couldn't hurt." I smiled, surprised at how much the gesture warmed me. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. We sat at the table, and for a while we just sipped tea and ate in silence. Not awkward silence, companionable, healing, in a way. After a few minutes, she looked up at me, her eyes steady. "I heard what happened," she said. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded. "I don't know everything," she continued, "but Lily's been venting, and Nathan called me yesterday. He's shaken." I gave a small, tired laugh. "I imagined so." Joanne tilted her head. "I told him I wasn't surprised. You've been carrying this family on your back for years. Frankly, I'm amazed you didn't snap earlier." I looked at her, startled by her bluntness. She shrugged. "I'm not here to scold you, Elaine. I'm here because I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not selfish, and you're certainly not wrong." I blinked quickly, overwhelmed by the kindness in her voice. "Thank you," I whispered. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You've given more than any of us ever had the right to ask, and we didn't thank you. We just expected it." There was no venom in her tone, just truth. I looked down at the mug between my hands. I let it happen. I didn't set boundaries. I thought love meant giving, until you had nothing left. Joanne reached across the table and laid a hand over mine. "Love is a two-way street, and they've been treating you like a roundabout." That made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in days. It was a small sound, cracked and surprised, but it felt good, necessary. We sat together for a while longer, talking about nothing and everything. She told me about her volunteer work at the local library, her recent obsession with puzzles, how she'd started taking piano lessons again after 40 years. "You'd love it," she said. "Just doing something for no reason, no audience, just for the joy of it." The idea settled into my mind like warm light. When she finally stood to leave, she squeezed my hand again. "Don't let them pull you back into silence, Elaine. You found your voice. Keep using it." "I will," I promised. She opened the door, then turned back one last time. "And if you ever need a break from all this, come visit me. I've got a puzzle table and an endless supply of coffee." "Deal," I said, smiling as I watched her walk down the front path. When the door clicked shut, I stood for a long time in the hallway, just breathing. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty this time. It felt like mine. The idea came from Joanne the following afternoon. She called just after lunch, her voice calm but firm. "Elaine, I've been thinking it's time for a family meeting." My stomach twisted immediately. "Joanne, I don't know." "I do," she interrupted gently. "Just the four of us. You, me, Nathan, and Lily. No distractions, no dinner parties, just honesty." I hesitated, pressing the phone against my ear as I stared out at the garden. The rosebush had caught a bit of late sun, its bare branches glowing faintly in the winter light. "I don't know if I'm ready to sit across from Lily again," I said. "Not after everything she said." "She's not ready either," Joanne said, "but she's willing. That's enough for now." I stayed quiet for a moment longer. "She needs to understand what this has cost you," Joanne continued. "And Nathan, he needs to stop standing on the sidelines." The words hit home. "I'll come," I finally said, "but I'm not smoothing anything over." "Good," she said. "Don't." The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at Joanne's house. Neutral territory, somewhere without history clinging to every corner. Somewhere we could all be uncomfortable together. That morning, I dressed with more intention than usual. A deep green sweater, one of my favorites, and my dark gray slacks. I pinned a brooch to my collar, an old silver leaf, a gift from Nathan when he was 16. It had spent years tucked in a jewelry box, forgotten. Today, I needed the reminder. Milo watched me from his spot by the hallway door, ears twitching as I reached for my coat. I knelt beside him, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Wish me strength." He licked my cheek, as if to say, "You already have it." When I pulled into Joanne's driveway, Nathan's car was already there. Lily's too. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart pounded in my chest, loud and steady, not from fear, from anticipation. This wasn't confrontation, it was reckoning. I stepped out into the crisp air and walked slowly to the front door. Joanne opened it before I could knock. She gave me a quiet nod, then stepped aside to let me in. The house was warm, the scent of cinnamon and wood polish in the air. Joanne's living room had always been calm, muted colors, soft lamps, worn but cared-for furniture. A space that didn't try too hard to impress. Nathan stood when he saw me. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. Mom, he said. I nodded, but didn't smile. Lily was seated on the armchair by the window, her posture stiff, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes met mine briefly, then dropped. We all sat. Joanne didn't speak right away. She poured tea for each of us, then finally sat in the last empty chair. I asked you all here, she began, because I think it's time we stop pretending things are fine when they're not. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Lily exhaled hard through her nose. Joanne turned to me. Elaine, say what you came to say. I swallowed and looked at both of them. You've treated me like I don't matter, I said, voice steady, like my feelings are just background noise. I've been the one to pick up the pieces every time either of you needed something. But when I needed you, when I just needed to feel included, you vanished. Lily opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. No, let me finish. She closed it again. I didn't ask to be praised. I didn't expect rewards. But I thought, at the very least, I mattered enough to be seen, to be asked, to be included in the life I helped build. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, staring at the floor. I missed birthdays, I continued. I made excuses for you both. I said you were busy. I told myself I was being dramatic. But then came that phone call, that cheerful little update, that you were going on a family trip, and it hit me. Lily looked up slowly. I wasn't family anymore. Her eyes welled, but I didn't stop. I wasn't angry when I froze the cards. I was done being used, done being invisible. Joanne leaned forward slightly, placing her mug down. Lily, she said softly, do you understand what she's saying? Lily blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she said, voice shaking. I swear, I didn't even think about it. We just planned it. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I replied, and you've done it over and over, not with cruelty, with indifference. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize it had gone so far. Nathan finally looked at me. I've been so caught up in everything, work, the house, just life. I thought you were okay. You never said anything. And you never asked, I said gently. He nodded, shame coloring his face. I don't want to lose you, he said. I don't want to be lost, I replied. But I won't keep sacrificing pieces of myself just to stay connected to people who only call when they need something. Joanne looked around the room. So what now? I took a breath. Now, I said, I need time. I need actions, not apologies. I need to see that I'm part of this family again, not because I clean up, not because I babysit or feed the dog, but because I matter. Silence settled. And for once, no one tried to rush through it. The family meeting ended without a dramatic finale. No grand declarations, no tight embraces, just a quiet understanding that things had shifted, subtly but permanently. We had spoken truths that couldn't be unsaid. And though no one left completely healed, we had cracked open the door. That was something. Joanne walked me to my car. As I stepped onto her porch, I felt like I could breathe again. You did well, she said, her hand resting gently on my arm. You said what needed saying. I nodded. I just hope they meant what they said. They did, she said. But even if they didn't, you meant what you said. That's what matters. I hugged her, briefly but sincerely, and drove home in a quiet daze. Milo greeted me at the door like I'd been gone for weeks, spinning in excited circles before trotting to the living room and collapsing in his favorite spot. I sat beside him and scratched behind his ears, grounding myself in his steady presence. The days that followed were delicate. Nathan sent a short message the next morning, thinking about what you said. I hear you. I love you. It wasn't long, but it was sincere. Lily didn't reach out right away. I didn't expect her to. She'd always been more complicated than Nathan, guarded, slow to process, and honestly, I needed the space just as much as she did. So I filled the time with small things that felt like victories. I started reading again. Real reading, the kind where you lose track of time and forget the water you boiled for tea until it's evaporated. I rejoined the local walking group I'd abandoned years ago. I went out to lunch by myself and didn't rush through it. Each choice felt like a small reclamation. I was sitting in the sunroom with a cup of chamomile when the message came in. Lily. Hi, Elaine. I've been thinking. I know things haven't been easy between us, but I'd like to start again. We're going to the lake house this weekend. Just the three of us. Me, Nathan and you. No expectations. Just, would you come? I read the message 3 times. Then I read it again. The lake house. I hadn't been invited there in years. It was where they went to unplug, to bond as a family. I was usually the one feeding Milo while they drank wine on the dock. I stared out the window, unsure how I felt. It wasn't a grand apology, and it didn't erase the past. But it was the first meaningful olive branch Lily had ever offered. I placed my mug down and stood, pacing the sunroom with slow, deliberate steps. Did I trust her intentions? Did I believe she really wanted me there? Or was this an attempt to check a box, smooth things over, put the tension behind us so she could feel better? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. If I wanted them to see me differently, I had to show up differently. Not as the fixer, not as the standby, but as Elaine. I sat back down and typed my reply. I'll come, but let's make this about all of us. Let's start fresh. No more ignoring the things that matter, she responded quickly. Lily. Agreed. I really mean it, Elaine. This matters to me. That weekend, I packed my bag with care. A warm coat, the green sweater I'd worn to the family meeting, a book I wasn't ready to put down, and Milo's leash, because of course, he was coming too. The drive to the lake house was quiet, just the hum of the road beneath my tires and the slow rhythm of my thoughts. As I neared the turnoff, memories tugged at me, of summers spent by the water, of Nathan learning to swim, of nights on the porch listening to crickets, while the world went still. But those memories didn't hurt anymore. They simply reminded me of who I'd been, and who I could still be. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, Lily was already outside, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. Nathan stood beside her, smiling uncertainly. I got out of the car and let Milo out first. He bounded forward, barking joyfully. Lily knelt to greet him, laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in months. Then she looked up at me. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I returned. We stood there for a second longer before Nathan stepped forward and hugged me. Not a polite hug, but a real one, his arms wrapped around me like he meant it. It's good to see you, he said. It's good to be seen, I replied. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. A fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. It wasn't extravagant, just thoughtful, present. We spent the evening playing cards, cooking together, and talking about nothing important. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, hesitations, moments where I could see Lily thinking too hard about what to say, but it was real, and real was all I had ever wanted. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, still and silver. Nathan joined me a few minutes later, standing beside me, in silence. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for asking, I replied. And I meant it. The next morning at the lake house, I woke to the sound of coffee brewing and quiet footsteps in the kitchen. The smell drew me out of bed, something warm and nutty, familiar. I pulled on my sweater and padded out to the living room. The fire had burned low, but still crackled softly. Through the window, the lake gleamed under the early morning light, the sky pale with dawn. Lily stood at the counter, her back to me, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She turned when she heard me and offered a tentative smile. Morning, she said. Morning, I echoed. She held up one of the mugs. I wasn't sure how you take it anymore, so I didn't add anything. That's perfect, I replied, taking it from her with a small nod of thanks. We sat down at the table together, the silence between us no longer strained, just cautious. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said after a few sips. I wasn't either, I admitted. She stared at the mug in her hands for a moment. I'm glad you did. I didn't respond immediately. I looked out the window, watching a ripple move across the water as a bird skimmed its surface. I've spent a long time wondering what I did wrong, I said finally. Wondering when I became a background character in my own family. Lily's face tightened. It wasn't intentional. I know, I said softly. That's what made it worse. We sat quietly again. The words between us hung heavy, but they didn't crush us. Lily shifted in her seat. I think I always assumed you were fine. You were strong, Elaine. You handle things. You don't ask for help. I guess I let that convince me that you didn't need anything from us. I did, I said, my voice steady. I needed to be seen. She nodded, slowly. I see you now. It wasn't an elaborate apology. It didn't wipe away the years of slow erosion, but it was a start, and I had learned by now that starts didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, they came with warm coffee and uncomfortable truths. The rest of the weekend passed with surprising ease. We went on a short walk along the edge of the lake. Nathan grilled dinner while Lily and I peeled vegetables side by side, occasionally bumping elbows like we used to in the early years of her marriage. They didn't ask me to clean up afterward. That meant more than they knew. Later, while Nathan was outside gathering firewood, Lily approached me in the living room, holding something behind her back. I found this in one of the drawers, she said. Nathan thought maybe you'd forgotten about it. She handed me a folded piece of paper. My breath caught. It was a letter, my handwriting faded and worn. A note I had written for Nathan years ago, tucked into one of his bags during a particularly hard time. I hadn't expected him to keep it. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling slightly. I believe in you. You are not alone, even when it feels like you are. I will always be here, even when you forget to look. Tears filled my eyes, blurring the words. He kept it all this time, Lily said. I thought you should know. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, we sat around the fire, each of us wrapped in blankets. Milo curled at my feet. There was laughter, real, unforced laughter, and stories, some old, some new. At one point, Lily leaned over and asked me about a lemon cake recipe I used to make. I want to learn how to do it right, she said. Would you show me sometime? That simple request, so casual, so sincere, unlocked something in me. It wasn't about cake, it was about being needed, being wanted, not for service, but for presence, for knowledge, for legacy. I'd like that, I said. As the fire cracked and the stars multiplied above us, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just peace, belonging. The next morning, we packed up slowly. No rush, no sense of escape. Just the quiet understanding that something had changed, and we all knew it. Nathan hugged me again, longer this time. Lily kissed my cheek before we left, and for once, it didn't feel like a formality. It felt like family. The ride home was quiet. Milo snored softly in the back seat, his tail thumping occasionally. I kept my window cracked just a little to let in the sharp, clean air. My thoughts weren't spinning this time. They were still. When I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house differently. Not as a place of exile, but as my sanctuary. My roots were here. My strength was here. I carried my bag inside, fed Milo, and then sat down at the table with a pen and fresh sheet of paper. I didn't know what I was writing yet. A letter, maybe, a journal entry, a recipe for lemon cake. It didn't matter. What mattered was that my voice was on the page. I was no longer waiting for an invitation to matter. I had arrived.